the Kennedy administration will exempt the conversion of Bitcoin to the US dollar from capital gains taxes.
I feel nice, like sugar and spice.
Recently, presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced the elimination of capital gains tax for Bitcoin to US dollar conversions, and also the elimination of the possibility of CBDCs to control the financial system. While this sounds fantastic on paper, the realist in me wants to take a little bit deeper dive into this because it sounds great on the surface. I also think that he might be persuading people just a little too hard to be on his side for the next election. Perhaps I'm jaded from all the poor presidencies that we've had recently, but part of me thinks, this is too good to be true. But if it is true, it's fantastic and makes him a great candidate for all crypto people. Republican, Democrat, middle of the road, it doesn't really matter. I'm sure there would be a lot of conservatives that would probably vote Democratic for the first time based off of this information alone, just because of their belief in the new financial system in Web3 and Bitcoin. It's also important to note, which he outlines in the speech, that there have to be some exceptions to this rule. Having a set tax elimination for Bitcoin to USD transfers for lower quantities for specific people who are below a certain limit makes sense. However, it doesn't make sense for some of those whales out there that have thousands of Bitcoin and transact those frequently. That would be a really big tax write-off that I don't think is fair or appropriate for those type of individuals. But for the everyday person transacting in Bitcoin, I think it's a fantastic idea. But let's look a little bit deeper into what he's talking about and listen to a little bit of what he has to say about it.
Kind of sensible jurisdiction and governance that recognize that Bitcoin is not a security and should not be regulated as one. And then also to put an end to the current policies of the Biden administration that are embodied by Choke Point 2.0 to punish banks for dealing in Bitcoin, and also to make strong barriers against the issuance of central bank digital currencies.
So if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know that me and the majority of the crypto space is against central bank digital currencies because it literally gives the government the control to shut your money on or off whenever they want to and track every single thing that you do, every single thing that you buy, every single thing that you sell. And there's absolutely no it's 100% transparency for the government and 0% transparency for you about what they're doing with your cash. It's completely unfair. We've already seen legislation, or at least attempts at legislation in Florida against central bank digital currencies by Governor Ron DeSantis, and many others have been very outspoken about CBDCs. So I'm definitely in support of his stance on that.
I want to talk today about two additional reforms that we've given a lot of thought to and are going to be part of our package. Like Singapore, Germany, Switzerland, Puerto Rico, and Portugal, the Kennedy administration will exempt the conversion of Bitcoin to the US dollar from capital gains taxes. And there are downsides to this policy that we have considered carefully, including, and I want to be explicit about this, that this kind of policy will do something that is inconsistent with many of the other policy objectives of my administration, which will give a windfall to some of the investors or the early investors in Bitcoin, many of you whom have a great deal of money and don't need a windfall. But the benefits of this policy, I think, are so great to our country that they dwarf the disadvantages of that outcome.
So while I do agree that this policy would have numerous advantages for most people, especially those newer in Bitcoin or those trading smaller amounts of Bitcoin, obviously there would have to be something put in place for people that are considered whales or people that transact a great deal of Bitcoin who don't really necessarily need the tax break, right? I think there does have to be some sort of point where, okay, if you exchange this number of Bitcoin or your wallet size is this number of Bitcoin or whatever, that there has to be some sort of tax diversion or inclusion of tax there for those transactions. However, it would also be extremely easy for a whale or somebody else to just make a bunch of smaller accounts and transact smaller transactions. So maybe it's a matter of total Bitcoin transacted per wallet or whatever. I feel like this would be very challenging to enforce. But if he were to come up with a creative way to enforce that so that people with whale status or a ton of money would have to pay taxes after a certain point, I do think that's beneficial while everybody else is tax exempt.
The outcome of that policy was really important, and this is almost exempting Bitcoin from exchange taxes is almost a perfect analogy for that, and we ought to be doing that in the United States. Secondly, the Kennedy administration will begin to back the U.S. dollar with real finite assets such as gold, silver, platinum, and Bitcoin, which is the world's hardest liquid asset, to strengthen the U.S. dollar and guarantee its continued success as the world reserve currency. This will include U.S. Treasury bills, notes, and bonds.
And at this point, anybody that's involved in economics or Bitcoin or cryptocurrency knows that most US dollars are not really backed by anything. So I'm all about backing the US dollar with Bitcoin. Not only would that increase the value of Bitcoin, potentially, it would also secure the US dollar with something that's seen as an international asset versus right now we're just printing money digitally, that it has a unique ID and it just gets sent to banks as something that's not real. It's not backed. It's not even paper anymore. It's just a piece of computer information. And we're exchanging pieces of computer information as currency, even though there's nothing backing the currency. So that is extremely important. And in my opinion, that might be the most important thing that he says, is backing the dollar with Bitcoin. So while this is a Bitcoin-centered video, clearly, I also want to point out some other things. He is the first candidate in a long time that's actually secured funding from the opposite party that he's running with, which is very unique. He's actually kind of sequestered himself outside of normal fundraising principles, getting money from large institutions in return for promise of policy or whatever goes on behind the scenes in the political world. He has made some public videos stating that he's actually hurt himself in securing funding by disagreeing with pretty much every big institution that wants policy X written or policy Y written, like we've seen lately with Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren and any other corrupt official that states crypto is garbage. Clearly, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies being commodities instead of securities, and driving the forward innovation of that in the United States to retain the United States as a top economic power in the world. He also has some other unique stances on other non-monetary things that might be interesting to check out. But the reason I present this information, not only for Bitcoin's stake in this, but also because he is maybe an interesting candidate for the next election. If you are a crypto holder and you love crypto and you're involved in crypto, even if you're not Democrat, whatever your preference is, whatever side you side with, if you don't side with one at all, it doesn't really matter. This might be an interesting candidate for you to check out and learn more about because it seems to be a very pro-crypto approach. That being said, I also have enough life experience and common sense to know that a politician is a politician. You know, I've dated a politician and it was probably the worst experience of my life because I never knew what was going on. I never knew what the truth was. I never knew what was reality. So there is that too. We can only take our best guess at what's in front of us. So while Bitcoin sits here and just kind of moves sideways and is incredibly boring after a good CPI data print with some bullish divergence on the stock RSI, but also failing to hold the median of the Gaussian channel on the daily chart right now. A lot of mixed signals, a lot of really low volatility. We have no idea what's going on. During all that, maybe it's time to take a look at some other things that prepare you for the next bull cycle and even the next decade or so, knowing who's going to be an official that supports Bitcoin and who's going to be an official that doesn't support Bitcoin. So I would invite you to take a look at that. That interview is all over Twitter and I'm sure the whole internet by now. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button, the like button, and leave me a comment below. We will see you in the next video, and I appreciate all of you. Safe trading.